I'm a pediatric nurse. A 6-year-old drew a picture of my house that I just moved into. The sheet of paper fell from the medical chart and slid across the polished floor of the pediatric corridor. When I bent down to pick it up, I felt my blood run cold. It was a child's drawing in crayon, careless strokes from a 6-year-old. But what was drawn there was impossible. It was my house. The house I had moved into exactly 3 days ago. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been a pediatric nurse at Memorial Children's Hospital for 5 years. I work the morning shift, 7 to 3, always in the oncology and neurology wards. It's a job that requires a strong stomach and an even stronger heart. You learn quickly that sick children aren't just smaller versions of sick adults. They process trauma differently, express pain differently, and sometimes they perceive things that we can't explain. I had just moved into my new house on Maple Street that past weekend. It was a small blue craftsman-style home with a distinctive red front door and a crooked oak tree in the yard that leaned dramatically to the left. The tree was actually what sold me on the place. That, and the fact that it was finally mine. After years of cramped apartments and noisy roommates, I had my own space. Nobody in my life had seen it yet. I hadn't posted pictures on social media. I hadn't even finished unpacking. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. I'd arrived at the hospital at 6:45, grabbed my terrible coffee from the nurse's station, the kind that tastes like it's been sitting since the night shift started, and began reviewing my patient assignments. I had 4 kids on my roster that day. There was Marcus, 8 years old, recovering from his 2nd round of chemotherapy. There was Lily, 10, post-op from a spinal surgery. There was Jacob, 12, a new admission with unexplained seizures. And then there was Emma Richardson, 6 years old, room 304. Emma had been admitted 2 weeks earlier after a car accident. Physically, she was fine, miraculously fine, actually. Not a scratch on her. But she hadn't spoken a single word since the accident. The crash had killed her mother instantly. Her father was still in the ICU 3 floors above us, in a medically induced coma with severe head trauma. Emma had been sitting in the back seat, properly restrained in her car seat, and had walked away without a bruise. But something inside her had broken in a way that X-rays couldn't detect. The psychiatric team had evaluated her multiple times. Selective mutism, they said, triggered by severe trauma. It wasn't uncommon in children who'd witnessed something horrific. The brain's way of protecting itself. She would eat if you put food in front of her. She would follow simple instructions, nod yes or no to questions. But she wouldn't speak. Instead, she drew, constantly. The nurses had given her an endless supply of paper and crayons, and she filled page after page with images that the psych team analyzed like ancient hieroglyphics, searching for clues to what was happening in her silent mind. I'd been assigned to Emma several times over the past 2 weeks. She was a tiny thing, with dark curly hair that her aunt tried to keep in pigtails, and enormous brown eyes that seemed to look right through you. She never cried, never smiled, just drew with an intense focus that was unsettling in someone so young. Most of her drawings were what you'd expect. Dark scribbles, red crayon everywhere, crude representations of cars and broken bodies. The kind of images that made seasoned nurses look away and swallow hard. But this drawing was different. This drawing was specific. And it was my house. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the paper in my trembling hands. There was the blue house with the red door, rendered in waxy crayon with the imprecise hand of a child, but unmistakably accurate. There was the crooked oak tree, leaning left, exactly as it did in my front yard. There were even the 3 front steps, the window placement, the small garden bed on the right side that still had the previous owner's dead rose bushes. And there was something else. Standing in front of the house, drawn in black crayon, was a tall figure. No face, no features, just a dark, elongated shape that seemed to loom over the small blue structure. And in the upper right corner, Emma had drawn what looked like a window, with a small figure visible inside. The figure had curly hair, like mine. The figure was holding something. It took me a moment to realize it was supposed to be a phone. My hands were actually shaking now. I checked the chart again. This drawing had been dated yesterday, Monday, by the day shift nurse. Emma had handed it to her along with a dozen others. It had been filed with the rest of her artwork, part of her medical record, evidence of her psychological state. I looked down the hallway toward room 304. I could see Emma through the open door, sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, bent over another piece of paper, another drawing in progress. The morning light from the window created a halo effect around her small silhouette. This had to be a coincidence. It had to be. Maybe she'd seen a picture somehow. Maybe she'd overheard me talking to another nurse about my move. Maybe. But I knew I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at work. I'd been too busy, too focused on my patients. And that tree, that specific crooked tree, you couldn't just guess that detail. I walked slowly toward her room, the drawing still clutched in my hand. The antiseptic smell of the pediatric ward, usually so familiar it was almost comforting, suddenly felt oppressive. The rhythmic beeping of monitors from various rooms created a dissonant soundtrack. My sensible nursing shoes squeaked slightly on the linoleum with each step. Hello, before we continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube removed their subscriptions without prior notice. Take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to... I love meeting each of the amazing people who are part of this community. Your participation makes a difference. Let's interact. Now, where was I? Yes. I was walking toward Emma's room, my heart pounding in a way that felt completely irrational. I'm a nurse. I'm trained to be logical, methodical, evidence-based, but something about that drawing had triggered a primal instinct, some ancient part of my brain that recognized danger, even when modern logic couldn't explain it. I entered room 304 with what I hoped was a calm, professional smile. Emma didn't look up. She never did. Her small hand moved across the paper in front of her with mechanical precision, selecting colors, applying them, creating something that I couldn't yet see from my angle. "Good morning, Emma," I said softly. "I'm Sarah. I'll be your nurse today. Remember me from last week?" She didn't respond, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. This was normal. This was expected. But today it felt different, heavier somehow. I went through my morning routine, checking her vitals, noting them in her chart. Blood pressure, perfect. Heart rate, steady. Temperature, normal. Physically, Emma Richardson was the picture of health. It was only when you looked into those vacant eyes that you understood how sick she really was. "I noticed you've been doing a lot of drawing," I said, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. "The therapist says that's really good, that it helps you process your feelings. Would it be okay if I looked at what you're working on?" For the first time since I'd entered the room, Emma reacted. Her hands stopped moving. She didn't look up at me, but her entire body went rigid. Then, slowly, deliberately, she placed her crayon down and slid the paper across the bed toward me. It was my house again. But this time, the drawing was more detailed, more disturbing. The same blue house, the same red door, the same crooked tree. But now, there were more figures. The tall, dark, faceless figure was closer to the house, standing at the front door. And there were new elements that made my breath catch in my throat. Emma had drawn flames, small orange and red flames coming from one of the windows. And the small figure inside, the one with curly hair like mine, was now at a different window. And she'd drawn what looked like hands pressed against the glass. "Emma," I said, and my voice came out hoarse. barely above a whisper. "Where did you see this house?" She didn't answer. She simply reached for another crayon, the black one, and began drawing on a fresh sheet of paper. I watched, frozen, as she drew the house again. The same house. My house. But this version was different. This one showed the backyard. I felt my chest tighten because I recognized it immediately. The small wooden deck, the chain-link fence, the overgrown bushes along the back property line. Details I hadn't mentioned to anyone. Details you couldn't see from the street. And there, drawn in crude but unmistakable detail, was the back door. And it was open. Just slightly ajar, with darkness visible beyond it. "I need to make a phone call," I said, my professional mask cracking. "I'll be right back, okay?" I walked out of the room on legs that didn't feel entirely steady. My mind was racing, trying to find rational explanations. Maybe Emma's family lived near me. Maybe she'd been to my house before, when the previous owners lived there. Maybe this was all just an impossible coincidence that my frightened brain was turning into something sinister. But I knew my neighborhood. I'd researched it thoroughly before buying. The Richardsons lived on the other side of town, nearly 20 miles away. There was no reason Emma would have ever been near Maple Street, let alone inside my backyard. I pulled out my phone at the nurse's station, ignoring the curious look from Jennifer, the charge nurse. I pulled up the security camera app I'd installed just yesterday. The house had come with a basic security system, one of those modern smart home setups, and I'd activated it as soon as I moved in, more out of excitement about the technology than any real sense of danger. The app loaded slowly, the hospital Wi-Fi struggling as always. Finally, the feed appeared. 4 camera angles: front door, back door, living room, and driveway. I scrolled through the recorded footage from the previous night, fast-forwarding through hours of nothing. Empty rooms, still doors, the quiet, mundane security of an empty house. Then, at 2:17 a.m., something moved on the back door camera. I stopped the playback, my finger hovering over the screen. Rewound. Played it again. There, in the grainy night vision footage, clear as day, was a figure. Tall, dark, moving slowly across my backyard toward the back door. The figure stopped at the door, seemed to examine it, reached out and tested the handle. The door didn't open. Thank God the door didn't open. I'd locked it, double-checked it, the way I always did. The figure stood there for nearly 30 seconds, then moved away, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the camera's range. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. Someone had been at my house. Someone had tried to get in. Last night, while I was sleeping upstairs, completely unaware, someone had been testing my locks in the middle of the night. And somehow, a 6-year-old girl who'd never spoken to me, who'd never been to my neighborhood, had drawn a picture of it. Had drawn a picture of the back door open. "Sarah, you okay?" Jennifer was looking at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to talk to Emma's social worker," I said, my voice tight, "and her aunt, and I think we need to call the police." "The police? Sarah, what's going on?" I showed her the drawing. Then I showed her the security footage. Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to alarm to something that looked like disbelief. But she didn't question me. She picked up the phone and started making calls. I went back to Emma's room. She was still drawing. That same mechanical focus, her small hand moving across the paper like she was in a trance. I stood in the doorway and watched her. This tiny, traumatized child who hadn't spoken in 2 weeks. This little girl who should have been thinking about cartoons and dolls and playground games, but instead was filling page after page with images that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own experience. "Emma," I said softly, kneeling beside her bed so we were at eye level. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay? I know you can't talk right now, and that's okay. But if you can hear me, I need you to nod. Can you do that for me? For the first time since I'd met her, Emma looked directly at me. Those enormous brown eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. It wasn't emptiness. It wasn't trauma. It was knowing. She looked at me like she was trying to warn me about something, like she was desperate to communicate something vitally important, but couldn't find the words. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. "The man in your drawings," I said, pointing to the dark figure she'd drawn multiple times. "Do you know who he is?" She nodded again. Then she picked up her black crayon and began to draw on the paper in front of her. Not a house this time. A face. She drew it quickly, frantically, like she was racing against time. When she was done, she pushed the paper toward me. It was a man's face. Rough features, heavy brows, a distinctive scar running down the left cheek. Emma had drawn it with surprising detail for a child her age, and at the bottom of the page, she'd written something. The letters were shaky, backwards in some places, but I could make them out. Bad man, hurt mommy. Hurt daddy, hurt you. My blood turned to ice. The aunt, Margaret, arrived within 20 minutes, frantic and confused. The social worker, David Chen, came with her. A police detective, a tired-looking woman named Martinez, showed up 30 minutes after that. I showed them everything. The drawings, the security footage. Emma's message. Margaret was crying. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "How could she know? How could she possibly know?" Detective Martinez studied the drawing of the man's face with intense focus. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through some images, then held one up next to Emma's crayon sketch. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Robert Fisk," she said quietly. "He was the other driver in the accident that killed Emma's mother. He ran a red light, T-boned their car at 60 miles an hour. He fled the scene. We've been looking for him for 2 weeks." She looked at me. "And you're saying this child drew your house? A house she's never been to?" 3 different houses, I corrected, spreading out the drawings. 3 versions. The last one shows the back door open. Someone tried to break into my house last night. It's on the security footage. Martinez's expression hardened. She made several quick phone calls, her voice low and urgent. Then she turned to me. "Miss Chen, I need you to not go home today. Not until we've cleared your house and checked it thoroughly. Robert Fisk is dangerous. He has a history of violent offenses, and he's desperate. If he thinks there's a witness, if he thinks Emma saw something, but she's been in the hospital for 2 weeks," I said. "How would he even know? He was at this hospital," Margaret said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh God, he was here, last week. I saw him." She looked at me with horror in her eyes. "He was in the hallway, outside the ICU, where Emma's father is. I thought he was just another visitor. I didn't realize. He was looking for Emma," Martinez said grimly, "to see if she could identify him. And he must have seen you." She turned to me. "You were Emma's nurse last week, correct?" "Yes," I said, feeling sick. "Tuesday through Thursday. He followed you," Martinez said simply. "He found out where you live. Maybe he thinks you're involved somehow, that Emma told you something. Or maybe," she paused, looking at the drawings again, "maybe he planned to use you as leverage, to get to Emma, to keep her from identifying him." The room fell silent except for the quiet sound of Emma's crayon on paper. She was drawing again, oblivious to our conversation, lost in whatever place her mind had retreated to. But when I looked at what she was creating, I felt my stomach drop. It was another house. Not mine this time. This one was larger, more imposing, and I recognized it immediately because I'd seen it every day for 5 years. It was the hospital. Memorial Children's Hospital. She'd drawn the front entrance, the emergency room bay, the parking garage, and there, in the parking garage, she'd drawn a small blue car, my car, and standing next to it was the tall, dark figure, The bad man. Emma, when did you draw this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. She just picked up a red crayon and began coloring something in the drawing. The time on a clock she'd sketched in the corner. The hands pointed to 3 o'clock. My shift ends at 3 o'clock. I park in the garage every single day, and it was currently 10:45 in the morning. Martinez saw my expression. She was already on her phone, already calling for backup, for hospital security, for units to sweep the parking garage. But I could see in her eyes that she was thinking the same thing I was thinking. If Emma could somehow see things that hadn't happened yet, if she'd drawn my house before someone tried to break in, if she'd drawn the backyard before I'd even checked that camera angle, then this wasn't a warning about a past threat. It was a warning about what was coming. In 4 hours and 15 minutes, something was going to happen in that parking garage, and I was the target. The hospital went into lockdown protocol within minutes. It wasn't a full evacuation. They couldn't do that with critical patients, but security was heightened. Police officers were stationed at every entrance. Detective Martinez personally escorted me to a secure room in the administrative wing, away from the pediatric ward, away from the parking garage, away from windows. But I couldn't stop thinking about Emma, about her dark, knowing eyes, about the way she'd drawn picture after picture, trying desperately to communicate something that her traumatized mind couldn't put into words. How does she know? I asked Martinez as we sat in the cramped security office, watching camera feeds from multiple monitors. How is this possible? The detective was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen things I can't explain. Children especially. Children who've experienced severe trauma. Sometimes they develop heightened awareness. Some psychologists call it hypervigilance. The brain goes into survival mode, starts picking up on tiny details, patterns, threats that most people would miss." She paused. "And sometimes, very rarely, it's something more than that. Something we don't have a good scientific explanation for." She pointed to the monitors. 3 officers were sweeping the parking garage now, checking every vehicle, every shadow. My little blue Honda Civic sat in its usual spot on level 3, innocuous and untouched. "But you believe her," I said. "You believe Emma somehow knew about all of this?" Martinez nodded slowly. That drawing of Robert Fisk was too detailed. She couldn't have seen him clearly from a car seat during an accident. The impact happened too fast, and she was facing the wrong direction, according to the crash reconstruction. There's no way she should be able to describe his face like that, let alone the scar. She looked at me, and she drew your house, including details from your backyard that nobody should know. So yes, I believe her. I don't understand it, but I believe it. The hours crawled by like cold molasses. I couldn't eat, could barely drink the coffee someone brought me. I kept thinking about Emma, alone in her hospital room, still drawing, still trying to warn people who couldn't hear her silent screams. Margaret had taken her out of the hospital. Detective Martinez had arranged that immediately. Emma was somewhere safe now, somewhere Robert Fisk couldn't find her. But the question remained. If he couldn't get to Emma, what would he do? Would he really be desperate enough to come after me, a nurse who'd barely spoken to his victim? Was his plan really to use me as some kind of leverage? At 2:45, 15 minutes before the time Emma had drawn on her clock, Martinez's radio crackled. "Unit 7 to detective. We've got movement, southeast stairwell, level 3 of the parking garage. Male subject matching Fisk's description. He's approaching the blue Honda Civic." Every officer in the security room tensed. I watched the monitor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The camera angle was imperfect, grainy, but I could see him. A tall figure moving with purpose through the shadows of the parking garage. He walked directly to my car. He didn't look around, didn't act suspicious. He walked right up to it, like he'd been there a dozen times before. And then I saw what he was carrying. A small red container. A gas can. He was going to burn my car. With me in it. That's what Emma had drawn. The flames. The figure at the window. She'd seen this. Somehow she'd seen exactly what he was planning. "All units, move in," Martinez said into her radio. "Take him down, now." 6 police officers converged on Robert Fisk from 3 different directions. He tried to run, dropped the gas can, made it maybe 10 feet before they tackled him to the concrete. Through the grainy security footage, I watched them handcuff him, read him his rights. That's what Emma had drawn. The flames. The figure at the window. She'd seen this. Somehow she'd seen exactly what he was planning. "All units move in," Martinez said into a radio. "Take him down, now." 6 police officers converged on Robert Fisk from 3 different directions. He tried to run, dropped the gas can, made it maybe 10 feet before they tackled him to the concrete. Through the grainy security footage, I watched them handcuff him, read him his rights. They tackled him to the concrete. Through the grainy security footage, I watched them. That's what Emma had drawn. The flames. The figure at the window. She'd seen this. Somehow she'd seen exactly what he was planning. "All units, move in," Martinez said into her radio. "Take him down now." 6 police officers converged on Robert Fisk. Haul him to his feet. He was shouting something, struggling. But it was over. It was finally over. I sat down hard in the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Martinez put a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. "And we've got him on attempted arson at minimum. Plus, fleeing the scene of a fatal accident. Plus the break-in attempt at your house. He's going away for a very long time." But I wasn't thinking about Robert Fisk. I was thinking about a 6-year-old girl who'd lost her mother, whose father was in a coma, who couldn't speak but had somehow saved my life anyway. A child who'd seen things she shouldn't be able to see, knew things she shouldn't be able to know, and had desperately tried to warn me the only way she could. 3 days later, I went back to work. Emma was no longer my patient. She'd been transferred to a specialized psychiatric facility where she'd get intensive therapy, but I asked if I could visit her. They allowed it, with supervision. She was in a sunny room with yellow walls and toys scattered around, so different from the sterile hospital environment. When I walked in, she was sitting at a small table, drawing. Of course she was drawing. "Hi, Emma," I said softly, pulling up a chair beside her. "I wanted to come say thank you. You saved my life. Do you know that? You saved me." She didn't look up from her drawing, but I saw her hand pause for just a moment. Then she continued, her crayon moving in precise, careful strokes. "I don't understand how you knew," I continued, "and maybe I'm not supposed to understand. Maybe some things are just beyond what we can explain. But I want you to know that I heard you. Even though you couldn't speak, I heard what you were trying to tell me." Emma put down her crayon. She picked up the paper she'd been working on and held it out to me. I took it with trembling hands, afraid of what I might see, what new horror she might be trying to warn me about. But it wasn't a warning. It was just a drawing of 2 people. One was clearly me, with my curly hair and my nursing scrubs. The other was a small girl with pigtails. We were holding hands, and above us, drawn in bright yellow crayon, was a sun. Just a simple child's drawing of a sunny day and 2 people together. At the bottom, in those same shaky letters, she'd written 2 words: "Thank you." I felt tears streaming down my face. I reached out and gently took Emma's small hand in mine. She didn't pull away. For the first time since I'd met her, I felt her squeeze back. "You're welcome," I whispered. "You're so very welcome." The therapist later told me that Emma spoke her first words since the accident that evening. Just 2 words, but they were a beginning. She said, "Bad man gone." And then she asked for her father. He'd woken up from his coma the day before. He was going to make it. They were both going to make it. As for me, I stayed in my house on Maple Street, though I upgraded the security system significantly. Every time I look at that crooked oak tree in my front yard, I think about Emma, about the mysterious way that some people, especially children, seem to perceive things beyond our normal understanding, about how trauma can break a person, but it can also open them up to experiences and awareness that seem impossible. The police found evidence that Robert Fisk had been planning the attack for over a week. He'd followed me, learned my routine, studied my house. He'd broken Emma's father's phone in the accident, but had somehow gotten access to the family's home afterward. He'd seen pictures of Emma, knew she might be able to identify him. His plan had been simple and brutal. Make me disappear. Leave evidence suggesting Emma's family was responsible. Create enough chaos and suspicion that his own role in the accident would be obscured. It was desperate and irrational, the plan of a violent man who was cornered and dangerous. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated a 6-year-old girl, a girl who couldn't speak but could see, a girl who'd lost her mother but found a way to save a stranger's life anyway. I still have Emma's drawings, all of them. The hospital allowed me to keep copies as a reminder. I framed the last one, the one of us holding hands under the sun, and hung it in my living room. Whenever I have a hard day at work, whenever I question whether I'm making a difference, sometimes the most powerful warnings come from the smallest voices. Sometimes the most important messages are delivered in silence. And sometimes, when the world seems dark and incomprehensible, a child can see the light that adults have forgotten to look for. Emma's speaking now, slowly but steadily improving. She and her father have moved to a new city, somewhere fresh where they can start over without the memories. But she sends me drawings sometimes. They're different now. Bright colors, happy scenes, flowers and rainbows and smiling faces, pictures of a future instead of warnings about danger. And me? I'm still a pediatric nurse at Memorial Children's Hospital. I still work with children who are facing the worst moments of their young lives. But I listen differently now. I pay attention not just to what my patients say, but to what they don't say, to what they draw, what they show me, what they're trying to communicate in the language beyond words. Because I learned something from Emma Richardson that no medical textbook could ever teach me. Sometimes the most important part of healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about paying attention to what's trying to break through. It's about hearing the warnings, seeing the signs, and believing in the impossible when a child's life, or your own, depends on it. The crooked oak tree still leans to the left in my front yard. The red door still welcomes me home every evening. But now, every time I unlock that door, I remember the night someone tried to break it down, and the 6-year-old girl who somehow knew it was going to happen. I remember, and I'm grateful. Grateful for security cameras and police officers and detective work, yes. But mostly grateful for the inexplicable gift of a traumatized child who couldn't speak but found a way to scream anyway. Who saw danger in her mind's eye and translated it into crayon and paper and warning. They say children are resilient. They say children heal. But I think it's more than that. I think children, especially those who've survived the unsurvivable, sometimes develop a kind of second sight. A way of perceiving threats and patterns and futures that we've lost in our rational adult minds. We dismiss it as imagination, as trauma response, as coincidence. But what if it's real? What if some children really can see around the corners of time, can sense danger before it arrives, can know things they shouldn't be able to know? I don't have answers. I'm a nurse, not a psychologist or a philosopher. But I know what I saw. I know those drawings. I know that security footage. I know that Emma knew things about my life, my house, my danger that were impossible for her to know. And I know that believing her, trusting her silent warnings, saved my life. So if you ever meet a child who can't speak, who draws instead of talks, who seems to know things they shouldn't know. Don't dismiss it. Don't explain it away. Pay attention. Look at what they're trying to show you, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is a 6-year-old with a box of crayons and a desperate need to be heard. Thank you, Emma. Wherever you are, whatever you're drawing today, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for warning me. Thank you for saving me. And thank you for reminding me that in this world of science and medicine and logic, there's still room for the inexplicable, the mysterious, and the miraculous. There's still room for hope, delivered in crayon on paper by a child who refused to let the darkness win.